Welcome back. This is day one of ecology. And believe it or not, guys, this is actually the last unit we'll do this year. So we just have to power through this last unit and then you guys are done with living environment forever. But what even is ecology? Well, whenever you see this word ology or the suffix ology at the end of a word, we're talking about the study of something. Okay, so biology is the study of life. Zoology is the study of animals, but what is ecology? Well, I see this word eco in front. Now, you may have heard this word in recent years. We've been talking about more eco-friendly options, right? So whenever you see that word eco, we're talking about the environment. So in short terms, ecology is the study of the environment. And we'll be looking at more specific details of that in just a second. But today's aim is how can we examine the components of a self-sustaining ecosystem? Now, I'm not going to tell you yet what this word ecosystem means because we're going to figure it out in just a few minutes, but I'm willing to bet you can already recognize maybe one prefix of this word because I seem to see the word eco. Just a thought. But now you guys have got two do not questions. I will warn you, because this is the beginning of the unit, you may not recognize some words yet, and that's okay. Try your best, and then press play when you're ready to go over these two questions together. All right, number one. The diagram below represents a food chain made up of organisms found in a field. Now, this picture, for whatever reason, did not copy well. This unidentifiable blob in the front is supposed to be a mouse eating a piece of corn. That is not what it looks like. But now that we've established that, you've also got a snake, and this bird is an owl. Okay, and using this picture, we are asked, which row in the chart correctly identifies characteristics that can be associated with members of this food chain? So we're given the words producer, consumer, autotroph, and heterotroph. Some of these words you may know, some of them you may not. Let's go through all of them together. So starting with the word producer. Whenever you see this word in ecology, we're talking about organisms that produce their own food, specifically through photosynthesis. Okay, produce own food through photosynthesis. Whenever you see the word consumer, we're talking about organisms that have to eat other organisms for food. Eat other organisms for food. So they cannot photosynthesize. Now, this word autotroph, anytime you see the word troph, we're talking about food or feeding. So if we stick the word auto in front of it, that means that food or that feeding happens automatically. It happens on its own. In fact, you might say that these animals can produce their own food. I'm sorry, I did not say animals. These organisms can produce their own food. Maybe through a certain process called photosynthesis? Just a thought. And then the last word we're going to go over is heterotroph. Now, we just said that the word troph is talking about food or feeding. If we stick the word hetero in front of it, that means different. So that means that these organisms have to eat different or other organisms for food. Now, if you haven't noticed already, these definitions sound pretty familiar, pretty similar even. And that's because these words are actually synonyms. So anytime you see the word producer, we're talking about autotrophs. Those are organisms that produce their own food through photosynthesis. Whenever you see the word consumer, we're talking about heterotrophs. These are organisms that have to eat other organisms for food. They cannot photosynthesize. So now let's figure out what this means. So the first column we're looking at are the producers. And we're given corn, mouse, corn, and owl. Now, two of these organisms cannot undergo photosynthesis. And obviously, that's going to be the corn, right? No, corn's a plant. So corn can photosynthesize, which means we're going to eliminate mouse and owl. Those are going to be consumers, not producers. Okay, so then moving on to the next column, we're looking at consumers, but snake and owl are both consumers. So let's move on to the next. We're given autotroph. So again, these produce their own food through photosynthesis. So it's going to be the mouse, right? No, the corn is our only producer and our only autotroph in this example, which means row 3 is our answer. So corn is a plant that can undergo photosynthesis. It produces its own food. Therefore, it's a producer and an autotroph. All right, moving on to the next. The diagram below represents interactions between organisms in a stable ecosystem. Now, what are we looking at here? This is going to be what's known as an energy pyramid. So we're looking at how energy is transferred through an ecosystem. And anytime you see this pyramid, this bottom row, this biggest row at the bottom, is always going to be plants or producers or autotrophs, right? All of those words mean the same thing. So producers, autotrophs are examples of plants. But then the rest of those 3 rows are all going to be different types of consumers or heterotrophs. Now, before I tell you this next part, let's go back to question 1. Now, when we looked at this food chain, you may have noticed that there are arrows pointing from one organism to the next. So anytime you see an arrow in this ecology unit, we're talking about the transfer or the flow of energy through an ecosystem. So when this snake eats the mouse, it's going to gain energy. So that energy flows from the mouse to the snake. When the owl eats the snake, the owl is getting that energy. So energy is flowing from the snake to the owl. We draw that arrow in the way or in the direction of the organism that is gaining energy from what's being eaten. So on this energy pyramid, we're always going to draw our arrows pointing up. Okay, because energy is flowing up through this ecosystem. So row B is showing organisms that eat plants and then gain energy from those plants. So this is a type of consumer, but specifically, we're going to call organisms that only eat plants herbivores. Okay, row C is going to be organisms that eat those herbivores or eat other animals. So they eat meat, right? This is going to be an example of a carnivore. And actually, row D is going to be carnivores as well. We'll talk more about that soon. But that gives us enough information to answer the question. So which statement correctly describes organisms in this ecosystem? Is it A, organisms in level B obtain their energy directly from the sun? Well, this is talking about organisms that can photosynthesize, which we know we're going to find in level A. So we can cross that one out. All right, B, organisms in level C obtain their nutrients directly from organisms in level D. Well, organisms in level C are going to be eating the herbivores. They're going to obtain their energy from the organisms in row B. So we're going to cross that one out too. C, organisms in level A are herbivores. Well, we said that our herbivores are on row B. Level A is going to be where our plants are. So then that means the only possible answer here is going to be answer choice D. Organisms in level D are heterotrophic. Up here, we said that rows B through D are all consumers. They are all heterotrophs. So that is your correct answer. All right, that was a long do now, but let's push forward to part A now. So we've got a passage to read through. As we go through this, I want you to underline anything you think is important, and then we'll use that to answer the questions that follow. All right, so an aquarium is a self-contained miniature world of life. Like the living things in an aquarium, every organism on Earth lives within its surroundings or its environment. All living things interact. They affect other living things in their environment, and all living things depend on each other in their environment. They are interdependent. These relationships of let's try that one more time. These relationships of interactions and interdependence between organisms and their environment are studied in the branch of biology known as ecology. So now I want to ask you guys, what is ecology, right? We said earlier, this is the study of the environment, but be a little bit more specific now that we've read this passage. So go ahead and pause this video, tell me what's ecology, and press play. So what is ecology? This is the study of the relationships between living organisms and their environment. And when we talk about relationships, we're talking about the interactions between organisms and their environment and the interdependence. So how these organisms interact with their environment and how they depend on their environment. All right, we got two more paragraphs to read. So every organism has to live somewhere. The environment in which an organism lives is defined by many factors, such as availability of food and water, amount of sunlight, temperature, and type of soil. Conditions that involve other living organisms are known as biotic factors. For fish in an aquarium, the biotic factors would include other fish, snails, algae, and plants. Conditions that involve non-living things are known as abiotic factors. For that same fish, the abiotic factors could include the water, air bubbles, gravel, temperature, light, and pH levels. The interactions and interdependence of organisms in their environment can be understood by examining specific places. All living and non-living factors interact in one specific place and are the parts of an ecosystem. Oh, there's that word. So a pond is an ecosystem, a forest is an ecosystem, even a little aquarium is an ecosystem. So when we see this word ecosystem, we're talking about an environment and specifically the interactions of the biotic and the abiotic factors in that environment and how it keeps life afloat. So on your paper, as well as on this PowerPoint, I've given you a picture of a forest ecosystem. So we're going to be looking at how the abiotic and biotic factors of this ecosystem work together. So remember that abiotic factors is talking about non-living factors, while biotic factors are talking about living things. So I want you to pause this video and tell me, what are the abiotic and biotic factors you see in this picture? All right. Now, I realized on the last page, I forgot to break down these words for you, as I always do. So remember that whenever we see this word bio, we're talking about life or living things. And whenever you see the prefix a in front, we're talking about, or it just means without. So biotic means living. And abiotic means non-living or without life. So let's start with biotic factors. What are the living factors in this environment? Well, you may have noticed the deer standing front and center. You may have noticed the birds, the ducks. It looks like there's a frog, a fox, a squirrel. I think that's a weasel, right? So there were lots of animals you could have chosen from. But then you also needed to notice the trees are living as well. The grass is living. Even those aquatic plants we see on the water are living. Now, and even if you zoomed in, which clearly this image didn't, but if you zoomed into the soil, we would even find living things in the soil, like bacteria, like worms, like fungi. So all of these are really important living factors in this ecosystem. But now, what about the abiotic factors that they interact with? Well, some of the non-living factors you should have noticed are the sunlight, are the water, the soil, the rocks, even the gases in the air like oxygen and CO2, the temperature, even the pH of the soil, right? All of these are non-living factors. Let's see if there's anything I missed. Sun, water, soil, rocks. Nope, I'm feeling pretty good about that, okay? So again, whenever you see this word ecosystem, we're talking about how all of these factors interact with each other. So an ecosystem has to have both abiotic and biotic factors in order to stay alive, in order to keep those living things still living, right? So then that leads us to our last, just kidding, it's not the last. We got two more things to do. We've got a few notes to take. So I want you to fill in these missing blanks. A blank includes all of the blank things in a given area interacting with each other. Okay, this is talking about an ecosystem. It includes all of the living things in an area, like plants, animals, and other organisms, interacting with each other, and also with their non-living environments. So weather, earth, sun, soil, climate, atmosphere. We're talking about how all of these things interact with each other. So then what do we call the living components of an ecosystem? Remember, bio means life, so we call those living components biotic factors. But then what do we call the non-living components of an ecosystem? Remember, abiotic means without life, so those are our non-living components. All right, now I've got a review question for you. I've got a challenge. I want you to think way back to like October of this year, and we did a lab called diffusion through a membrane, and we looked at how different substances can or cannot diffuse through a cell membrane. So now, which one of these substances can enter a cell by diffusion without having to be digested? So remember, diffusion is movement of molecules from high to low concentrations without energy. And this word digested just means broken down. So which one of these molecules is small enough to diffuse without being broken down? Well, protein, starch, and fat are all pretty big molecules that would have to be broken down. But water, thankfully, is small enough to diffuse freely through a membrane. So the answer there is A. All right. Last thing we're going to do today is we're going to answer 4 questions based on this cartoon we see right here. So what do we see happening in this cartoon? Well, we see that cows are eating grass. So we can go ahead and answer question 3A. How are the organisms interacting with the environment? The cows are eating grass. In fact, we could say that energy is flowing from the grass to the cows. Now, remember at the beginning of this lesson where I told you that anytime we see this arrow, we're talking about the flow or the transfer of energy. So if in this example, energy is flowing from the grass to the cows, we would draw our arrow like this. We would say grass, arrow, cow, because although the cows are eating the grass, the energy is flowing from the grass to the cows. So now that sets us up to answer this first question. Which sequence best represents the flow of energy in the cartoon to the left? Well, we know that grass is considered an autotroph or a producer, right? It can undergo photosynthesis and produce its own food. But cows, on the other hand, are consumers or heterotrophs. They have to eat other organisms for food. So now let's look at these answers. Is this a predator and prey relationship? I don't think so. Is this a parasite and a host relationship? I don't think so. But these next 2 look pretty viable because grass is both a producer and an autotroph. But now we just have to figure out, are cows herbivores or carnivores? Well, remember we said that herbivores eat plants and carnivores eat meat. So if a cow is eating this grass, is a grass an example of a plant or meat? Well, grass is going to be an example of a plant. So the answer here is 3. Energy is flowing from a producer to an herbivore, from the grass to the cows, right? So now we got to identify the abiotic factors in the picture, which is the non-living factors. So for these non-living factors, you could have said the theoretical sunlight. You could have said the oxygen and the CO2 in the atmosphere. You could have said the temperature. You could have said the soil. What else is there? You could have even said the bell that the cow is wearing. Okay, all of those are non-living factors. But what about for the biotic or for the living? There's a child screaming outside. What about for the living factors? Well, obviously we've got cows, we've got grass. Now, if you zoom into that soil, you might see bacteria or worms living in that soil. Those are living, but I think that's all the living things we have here. Okay, which means all you have left to do is complete that exit ticket. Let me know if you have any questions and have a wonderful day. I will see you guys tomorrow.